Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review and comparison of the Craftsman USA versus Lisle USA steering wheel pullers. And I thought this would be an interesting comparison because both of these sets are intended to do the same thing on basically the same variety of vehicles. Although arguably Craftsman's a bit newer and designed more for vehicles that do have airbags, hence improved kit for GM vehicles with airbags. But both of these are going to be fairly old. These are going to be easily 10 to 20 years old, to tell you the truth. This Lisle set, I believe, may be quite a bit older than that because we have the little icon here, and it's copyright 1996, which make that 22-year-old set. New in the box. And actually, I didn't buy it anywhere near that long ago, but it's just been the same set since that time. And these kind of reviews and comparisons are neat because both tools are intended to do the same thing. They're both equivalent quality, yet they each have quite a bit of variation in their design. So we have the Lisle 45,000 and the Craftsman 41,833. Sears still has a listing for this on their website, but it was sold out. But there were some sets on eBay. This is still a current Lisle set. With a discount. I've seen it $25 online. I think in auto shops this is like 30 bucks or something on the shelf, and that's about what the Craftsman was. Let's give you just a quick close-up of the packaging here so you can read it. Not a ton, although they do have a couple of interesting pictures, and they do show how it's compatible with crankshaft timing belt pulleys or crankshaft pulleys. And what's interesting about this one is it looks exactly like it was on a Mitsubishi Eclipse I had, so I always thought that was kind of neat because my timing gear on that 4G63 looked exactly like that. And I do like the Craftsman does come with a little bit of an instruction booklet. The Lisle is just a bit smaller. I should say that I'll wait till I get into them. And then here's the Lisle, and it's quite a bit more basic. And we know that this is a bit newer one because there's a sticker to see manufacturer's manual to avoid firing the airbag, accidentally setting off the airbag. So let's go and open these up. Look at this unboxing. Look how simple that is. Boom. Unboxed. And the same with the Craftsman. I always kind of like these packages because they save the manufacturer a bit of money, but they still help you keep the tools organized. Obviously, these thin packages, do tend to get beat up. And the Craftsman's really the one that I have used more so than the Lisle. Just because the situations I was using it in, I needed the longer bolt for the Craftsman. So let's go ahead and take a look at both of these base puller units. And here we are. We have a nice stamping on the Craftsman. The Lisle, an infamous Lisle... What's interesting is Lisle just rarely labels their tools. It's just crazy. And it probably hurts their sales. I mean, it has to. When people find tools, and if you find something like this outside the packaging in a bin, you just say, oh, wow, that looks like a pretty nice tool. Look at the bolt. It's actually forged. The hex is forged on that. That doesn't look so bad. And I have no idea who made it, which is a little bit odd, where Craftsman does at least stamp their tool. A big aspect of both of these is the Lisle is captured, so it's full loop, so the bolts don't really want to fall out super easy. So when you put these in, it keeps them a little bit more steady, and I did appreciate that about the Lisle. But the difference is that you have a bit less range than the Craftsman, as you can see here. The Craftsman can do simply a wider range, maybe not quite as close together in the center, but definitely more on the outside edges. The caveat to that is the bolts aren't captured, so when you're putting this in and threading the bolts, the idea of the Craftsman is you would actually thread one bolt in and then get this unit on and then thread the other bolt on. With the Lisle's a little bit easier because you can just drop both bolts in and then get it all adjusted up. We can see that the cross section is about the same on both of these, but the Craftsman is taller. The Craftsman is a heavier duty unit. There's more threads engaged. We can see, if we flip this around, we have a much longer bolt. It's about 30% longer and about 30% larger in diameter. So it's just heavier duty, rated for higher, I'll say, tonnage. And even a small puller like that, like these, can easily produce 2,000 pounds of pulling force. When you have the ratio of the screw thread, you can get some pretty incredible levels of force. And that's why they advertise this for crankshaft pulleys. These would basically pull just about anything, and they're kind of nice to have just as a two-prong, more or less easy to use puller. Now we can see on the Craftsman that I believe the hex is machined on it, but that's just fine. The other thing about the Craftsman is that they have a swivel, kind of like a C-clamp that's been swaged. We can see where they swaged it, and they actually didn't do such a super great job. But it's still fine, and what's kind of nice is it kind of self-centers and it's already integrated. Where the Lisle is a little bit different. The Lisle does have a little peg here, and now we'll just go over the tip, and it works pretty well. One interesting aspect about the Lisle is it comes, if we can get these out, with a couple of washers, and I kind of like the aspect initially, like a kind of a fool. I thought you did that. No, they're just washers to use with the bolts, and so you don't have the heads quite causing as much damage to the top of this, especially as you're doing pulling, just to help offset some of the pressure. And you know, that's kind of hit or miss. The reason that they are nice, thick, heavy-duty washers, but what Craftsman has done is Craftsman just gave you washer head bolts instead, like this, and I think that's a better idea. They should have just given you slightly more expensive washer head bolts, and then you wouldn't have these extra pieces that you would be losing and fiddling around with, even though they work. Another aspect of between the Lisle and the Craftsman here is the fact that the Lisle only comes with 8 bolts, where the Craftsman comes with 10 bolts. And I suppose we should compare the quality of these bolts, the grades. Let's see if they're even easy to see. Not really on that. These are just grade 5 bolts. You can see that because there's only 3 lines instead of 5 or 6 lines on fractional threaded bolts. That's how you tell the difference in quality. So I would assume it's similar for the Craftsman, that these are just going to be standard grade bolts. Those aren't going to be high strength fasteners at all. And when it comes to Imperial fasteners, it'd be something like this. Excuse me, we'll do this little one where you'll see like 6 lines indicating that it's a grade 8 high strength fastener. Sometimes you run the interesting ones like this Lawson, or excuse me, this Supertanium that, you know, it attempts to say that they are above grade 8 by putting 8 lines on them. And then when it comes to metric fasteners, especially automotive, it's really nice because they usually just have printed on them. You have grade 4, grade 7, 10, 12, etc. And that's always convenient because you just have a number. I've always really liked that about that standardization when it comes to metric fasteners. And when it comes to socket head cap screws, they're usually the same way, such as this one where it clearly says 12.9 on it, indicating it's a very high grade fastener. And that's always an option. You always go to the hardware store and just get higher quality fasteners if you do want to upgrade these kits. And of course they didn't do that from the store because these would have been from $30 kits, they would have been $50, $75 just because of the cost of having high grade fasteners. High grade fasteners are significantly more expensive than their low grade counterparts, which would of course make sense. Oop, the label disappeared. One last aspect I was going to mention about the Craftsman, which I do appreciate over the Lisle, is the Lisle I do not believe comes with any metric fasteners. It is all Imperial, which seems a little odd because you do need the metric 8mm, and so the Craftsman does include that. That would be like essentially, I take that back. Let me go and correct myself. These are actually the 8mm bolts out of the Lisle, but they're much different than the Craftsman ones, and I think that's a little bit interesting. And they only have 3 lines since it's a metric bolt, but it's kind of, these are kind of interesting. These are integrated, indicating that they're a low-grade metric fastener, but they're not using the standard, or they just put the number on it, i.e. number 4. They just use 3 kind of odd-shaped lines. It's a metric fastener that's using markings like an Imperial fastener might use, but they changed the shape just to make it special because it's a special bolt. So I always thought that was a little interesting. So what the Craftsman comes with that the Lisle does not is these special GM bolts, the those 5/16 by 18s, that would be these, because it's just a long smooth shank with just a little bit of thread on the end. And I kind of was wondering why they did that, and it's just fine, and I think it just makes it easier to pull it out of the set when you have it, is if you need those strange GM bolts, you know it's just a long bolt with a tiny amount of thread. And when you need the metric ones, they're the black screws. And so I did appreciate that kind of forethought with the Craftsman. It makes it much easier just to pick out the parts that you need from the set. And so if you want to know the truth, I would have liked if the Craftsman was just a little bit larger and include the round buckles, and that would be the advantage I'd give to the Lyle. Other than that, I would have to recommend the Craftsman, of course, because the Craftsman just comes with more fasteners. You don't have washers and stuff to fiddle or lose and fiddle around with. You have washer head bolts. The little swivel is integrated, and every once in a while you don't want the swivel. You do want the sharp point, but that wouldn't really be so much for pulling steering wheels. It would be for this to use on other pulling operations. So I do appreciate that, and it might have been nice if Craftsman had a way where this could pop on and off. But it is nice that it's integrated, so when you're using this tool, all you have is 2 bolts and the puller, and it's 3 parts to deal with. Where on the Lyle, if you need the foot and you need the washers and you need the bolts, you're going to have 2 bolts, the foot, 2 washers, and the puller. All of a sudden you have 6 parts that you're dealing with rather than 3. And so obviously it's not quite as convenient as the Craftsman. And finally, the Craftsman is just much heavier duty, much thicker bolt, thicker buckle, more thread engagement. It's obvious that this Craftsman is probably where it could easily take twice as much torque as the Lyle, simply because the threads would blow on the Lyle far earlier than they would on the Craftsman. So definitely, I would recommend the Craftsman in this situation if you can find it. They still have listings for them, and I did see them on places like eBay, and they may show up again at Sears. But this is a pretty common set, so places like Ace Hardware, there's a lot of places that sold Craftsman tools that were not Sears. There's also things like Sears outlets, so in smaller towns, they never had a full-size Sears, but they had Sears outlets, and I've seen some of those are actually still around. And that's where you find these sets, because oftentimes, a store will open, they'll buy 10 of these sets, and then literally they'll sell one a year. It's kind of surprising. I've been into quite a few stores where they've had tools on the shelf that have just been there years and years and years and years. A long time ago, I did a review of SK swivel impact sockets, and the 3/8 set I had in there was actually because of CarQuest was closing down. That had been up on their wall for 15 years or something, 10, 15 years, and they sold it to me for half off on new SK, so it was that's how I ended up with those. Anyway, that's the end of this quick little, well, semi-quick little review and comparison of the Lyle and Craftsman American-made steering wheel pullers, and now you know about them, or at least more about them, and I'll conclude this video. So I really appreciate everybody watching. Please do subscribe. Catus Maximus out.